Publication box annual permit policy, 8.6. Do I have a mover? Oh, sorry, sorry. HSR bus advertising contract extension, and clearly in this report they want to sole source it for, I believe, initial 2 years. So I'm looking for discussion. Councillor Merla.
Just quickly, can we have an explanation as why we're extending it without going to a tender process?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Appreciate the opportunity to. There are a few concurrent activities happening, in particular with the bus and shelter advertising. One is we're transitioning from the HSR over to the Enterprise Management Group. So we're consolidating all of our revenue programs under John Hertel. And John was to be here today to speak to this report, and unfortunately he got called away to another emergency. The second point is that Council has asked us to consolidate the expiry dates of all of our contracts to the shelter advertising contract expires December 31st, 2015. This would extend this contract to expire at the same time as the shelter advertising contract. The other is that the point raised is Council, I know, is sensitive to single sourcing. And historically, there has not been a competitor come forward. And in this case, this time around, this is the third time around with this contract, there are in fact two competitors that have come forward and expressed an interest in bidding on this contract. In my discussion with John Hertel, I guess we're weighing the pros and cons of how to handle both Council's sensitivity to single sourcing contracts, in particular at a time when there's two competitors out there wishing to bid, and then aligning the Council's desire to align the contract expiry dates to December 31st, and then finally to get us through the Pan Am. So had John been here, I don't want to put words in his mouth, his recommendation would have been to extend the existing contract to the end of 2015 to allow us the time to transition these contracts into enterprise management, to align the expiry dates of the advertising and the shelter contracts, and to get past the Pan Am Games. So those 3 points on one side of the equation. On the other side of the equation is the issue of single sourcing, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, and as you are aware, we are somewhat sensitive to the sole source, but also, I guess there's some, messaging that they're not performing to the level that we were anticipating. So I guess when you combine the two issues, we have an issue surrounding optics more so than anything else. I'm wondering, is there any way through you, Mr. Chairman, Don, if we could perhaps look at reviewing the extent of which the extension is, as opposed to overall not supporting this that's before us?
We're in your hands, Mr. Chairman. I should mention that this service provider has given us excellent service. We have no dissatisfaction whatsoever with this service provider. We think the revenue is in keeping with what we'd get on a competitive RFP. One thing we should keep in mind is that these agencies line up their clients a year in advance. They really need a year of lead time. So they're negotiating contracts now for a year from now. I guess in working with John, the 21 month period seemed like a long period of time for me. The rationale for it is to try to achieve Council's objective of aligning both the shelter advertising contract and the bus advertising contract expiry dates at the same time. So the window could be shorter, there's no question about it, but we wouldn't meet Council's objective of aligning the two expiry dates of the shelter and the bus advertising contracts.
I guess the Council's directive is really conflicting with the two directives are conflicting with one another. And it does beg the question, Mr. Chairman, which directive should prevail over the other? And I'm fine with it, but I think
we serve at your pleasure there, Mr. Chairman. That's exactly it. We have a little bit of competing objectives here, and 21 months is a long period of time. It could be shorter. It should be at least a year to allow us to issue an RFP and allow a transition should the current incumbent not be able to provide the service. But then if we shorten the time period, then we won't achieve the objective of aligning the expiry dates of the two contracts.
So in essence, in the perfect world, through you, Mr. Chairman, if we were to be looking at terminating this particular contract and and going out to an RFP, you would require 18 months regardless. Is that correct?
At least a year, Mr. Chairman. And that's, it's not so much the executing the RFP, it's more a case of a good, proper business practice with the current service provider, and that they understanding that they negotiate their contracts a year in advance.
Okay. Well, I'll support it based on what I've heard, but I guess it's important that we have. Not very comfortable with the optics, but I think in the reasoning surrounding the decision, I can support it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Jackson.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman, and I'm supportive. And Don, can we just highlight it's street scene media? You said that good record overall, and can you just highlight the revenue for these additional 21 months, Don, Mr. Chairman, through you, because I believe there's a substantial increase in the revenue over the 21 months. Mr. Chairman, through you to Don, please.
I'm sorry, I'm at a bit of a disadvantage because we had actually passed that over to John already, and John was going to speak that today. The report does indicate a minimum guaranteed revenue of $425,000, which is certainly, in our view, at least or better than what we might anticipate from the market today. So it's not a direct answer, but it is a...
Okay, Don, I'm just seeing here on page 2, 425,000 per year, but for the 21 months, the total revenue increase will be $770,000 over the 21 months if approved as is, and that represents a 3.5% revenue increase, which is even above rate of inflation.
That's correct, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, I appreciate a couple of the concerns raised by Councillor Marula, but in light of good incumbent record, moving forward, aligning, and getting more revenue over the next 21 months, I'm supportive. Thanks, Don. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I'll ask Councillor Merlo to take the chair. I guess, again, on the same light, I have 21 months is not a short term. Let's face it. 21 months we've tendered contracts out for 21 months or less. One of the arguments I'm hearing is that it takes a year to line up the customers. So have we consulted with the other people, obviously, that made clear they have an interest, to determine whether they would be ready for an RFP in the context of those arguments you've put forward?
Well, I'd be certain that they would be ready for an RFP. My response was in reference to the incumbent service provider who has negotiated contracts a year out. So undoubtedly, I think that in both cases, the other two parties that have stepped forward would be interested in an RFP process proceeding at the earliest possible opportunity.
And it's my understanding that this organization has actually, the revenue generated is less than what was anticipated over this period of time. Is that correct? Actually,
with respect to the bus advertising through street scene, we're very comfortable with the revenue generated. In fact, it's performed, this group is largely a local group. They only serve the Hamilton, Brantford area. And historically, we've had a very good track record with them in terms of performance.
So I'm seeing in this report that it was anticipated at $425,000 per year. Is that in fact what we've been receiving on an annualized basis? Yes, Mr. Chairman.
As Councillor Jackson pointed out, John's negotiations with street scene to this date, he's got them to commit to, as I understand it, a 3.5% increase in minimum annual guarantee. It's unfortunate that John couldn't be here. He fully intended to be here and got called away to another emergency.
And are we comfortable that they can provide greater revenue in that 21 months than going out to tender?
Well, that's, you don't know until you go to tender. What can happen if you go to tenders is, I've seen in the past where a respondent will high bid a response in order to buy the contract. So I think that that's an unknown. All I can say is that this level of revenue, in my experience, is representative of the high end of what we might anticipate under normal conditions, Mr. Chair.
So, but regardless, whether we tender or continue with what's being recommended here, there's not going to be revenue forgone.
That's correct. In fact, our revenue will grow by 3.5% per year.
Okay, so I mean, certainly hearing that, I mean, I understand why staff's putting this forward, but just socially and consciously from a business perspective, I'm not a sole source supporter. I have never been a sole source. This is a pretty extended period of 21 months. We don't know if we can end up with a better package from another competitor. But until we test the market, we'll never know, and we're delaying testing the market for 21 months. So for those reasons, I cannot support this report that's before us. So I'll take the chair back. Any other speakers? Moved by Councillor Jackson, second by Councillor McHattie. All those in favor? All those opposed? How many recorded as opposed? Carried. Thank you.